The storm had raged all night over Storm's End, battering the walls with wind and rain, as if the gods themselves were furious at the world below. In the damp halls of the castle, the cries of a newborn echoed louder than the thunder outside. "She's strong," Lord Stefan Baratheon murmured, looking down at his newborn daughter. The maester, despite his attempts to appear neutral, had hesitated when announcing the birth. A girl. Lord Stefan sighed, brushing a hand over the dark tufts of hair atop the infant's head. He had hoped for a boy, a future Lord of Storm's End, a warrior who could carve his own path. A girl complicated things, but even as she lay swaddled in thick furs, her tiny fingers clenched into fists, a fierce determination in her cries. Lady Kasana, weary but smiling, whispered, "She has the storm in her. We should name her Roberta." And so, Roberta Baratheon was born, not as a soft-spoken lady meant for courtly life, but as the girl who would one day shake the Seven Kingdoms. Roberta Baratheon grew up as no lady of Westeros was expected to. While the daughters of noble houses were taught embroidery and courtly manners, Roberta wielded a sword before she could properly write her name. By the time she was 14, she could outride most of her father's knights, and by 16, she was besting grown men in duels. She was taller than most women, broad-shouldered and muscular, with a voice that carried like rolling thunder. The lords at court whispered that she was more man than woman, but she didn't care. Let them talk. She was a Baratheon. But it was love, not war, that first shattered her world. Lyanna Stark, the girl Roberta adored from the moment she saw her. Lyanna was unlike the soft, whispering women of the South. She rode like the wind, fought with a wooden sword when she thought no one was watching, and had a wildfire spirit. Roberta had loved her in silence, pretending her feelings were no different from admiration. But deep down, she had known. And then Prince Rhaegar Targaryen took Lyanna away. When the news came, Roberta roared in fury, smashing a goblet against the stone wall of Storm's End. The court fell silent, watching her shoulders heave with rage. But her anger was not just for Rhaegar. It was for her own powerlessness. I should have taken her first. I should have told her, but it was too late. Eddard Stark and Brandon Stark rode to demand her return, only for Brandon to be executed by the Mad King. And then, war. Roberta didn't hesitate. She declared rebellion, raising the banners of House Baratheon alongside House Stark and House Arryn. Some doubted whether the realm would follow a woman into war. The lords of Westeros had never seen a woman lead a rebellion. But when Roberta rode onto the battlefield at the Battle of Summerhall, clad in blackened armor, with a stag painted across her chest, they knew. She was no mere woman. She was a storm. The rebellion raged across Westeros like a wildfire, and Roberta was at its heart. She did not command from the rear like some lords preferred. She led from the front, her warhammer crushing men into the mud, her battle cries shaking the field. But it all came down to the Battle of the Trident. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen stood at the head of his army, his silver armor glimmering like the dawn. He was beautiful, they said, Westeros's perfect prince. Roberta didn't see beauty. She saw the man who had stolen Lyanna, the man whose actions had condemned thousands to death. As their armies clashed, Roberta pushed forward like a battering ram, her men barely able to keep up. She didn't care for strategy now. This was personal. She wanted Rhaegar. Their eyes met across the battlefield, and then they charged. Rhaegar's sword was fast, faster than she expected. He was no pampered prince. He had trained for this. His blade carved deep into her side, but she gritted her teeth and swung back. Her warhammer connected with his shield, the force sending tremors up her arms. They clashed again and again, steel ringing against steel. Blood seeped from her wound, but she ignored it. She would not fall. Then she saw it, the faintest hesitation in Rhaegar's stance, the brief moment of doubt. And she struck. The warhammer crashed into his chest with a sickening crack, denting the rubies on his armor. Rhaegar staggered, blood spilling from his lips. The next blow shattered his ribs, and the third, driven by rage, by love lost, by years of fury, ended him. As his body fell into the river, the rubies from his breastplate scattered into the water like drops of crimson rain. The Ruby Ford was born, The Targaryen forces broke. The battle was won. But Roberta did not cheer. She stood over Rhaegar's lifeless form, her breath ragged, and whispered, "Was she worth it?" And then, with a heart heavier than her warhammer, she turned away. The war wasn't over yet. She still had a throne to take. King's Landing burned. The city stank of smoke and blood as the Lannisters, who had once called themselves loyal to the Targaryens, now betrayed them in the most brutal way. Roberta arrived at the Red Keep's gates to see bodies piled high. Loyalists, civilians, and Targaryen defenders alike. The streets ran red, and at the heart of it all stood Tywin Lannister, his golden lion banners waving triumphantly over the massacre. She rode through the gates, armor streaked with blood from the trident, her warhammer still clutched in her gauntleted hands. Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, knelt beside the corpse of the Mad King, his golden armor stained crimson. "It's done," he said, lifting his weary eyes to meet hers. "Aerys is dead." Roberta barely acknowledged him. The Mad King had never been her true enemy. It had always been Rhaegar, the man who had taken her Lyanna. She barely listened to the formalities of surrender. There was only one thing left to do. She rode north. The journey to the Tower of Joy was long and bitter. The closer she came, the heavier her heart grew. Eddard Stark rode at her side, his face unreadable. He had been the most loyal of them all, the brother she had never had, the man who had supported her claim when others doubted. When they finally reached the tower, the truth shattered her like no war ever had. Lyanna was dying. She lay weak and pale on a bed of crimson-soaked sheets, her once fierce spirit barely flickering behind her tired eyes. The moment Roberta saw her, all the rage, all the war, all the bloodshed, it all became meaningless. Lyanna whispered to Eddard, her voice barely a breath, "Promise me, Ned." And then she was gone. Roberta did not cry. She had no tears left. She stood in silence, staring at the fragile, lifeless form of the woman she had loved more than anything. All the battles, all the victories. What did they mean now? She had won the throne, but she had lost the only thing that had ever truly mattered. The Iron Throne was everything Roberta had fought for, yet as she sat upon its jagged steel, she felt nothing. The hall was filled with lords and ladies swearing fealty, banners of Baratheon gold and black hanging where the dragon's red had once ruled. The realm called her Queen Roberta, first of her name, but in her heart, she was still just a woman who had lost too much. She should have been triumphant. She had overthrown the Targaryens. She had won the greatest rebellion in history. She was the first woman to ever claim the throne by conquest, defying centuries of male rule. And yet, she was alone. Her marriage to Cersei Lannister was sealed the moment Tywin Lannister marched his army into King's Landing. It was a political necessity, a union that would bring the wealth and power of the Westerlands under her rule. Cersei was beautiful, golden-haired, sharp-eyed, the very image of a perfect queen. But Roberta saw the truth in her from the start. There was no love between them, only duty and ambition. The wedding was a grand affair, but behind closed doors, their marriage was as cold as winter steel. Roberta spent more time in the training yard than in the royal chambers. She drank too much, fought too much, and let the weight of her grief drown her in ale and blood sport. She took lovers, male and female, but none of them filled the void. The court whispered about her behind her back. A queen should act like a lady. She fights like a man, drinks like a man, whores like a man. What kind of queen is this? It didn't matter. None of it mattered. The realm she had fought for now felt like a prison. The very thing she had bled to win was slipping through her fingers. She was a warrior, not a ruler. She could win battles, but she could not win peace. And in the shadows, enemies stirred. The remnants of House Targaryen had not been wiped out completely. Across the narrow sea, whispers spoke of Viserys and Daenerys, the last dragon heirs biding their time. The war was not truly over. It never was. The Red Keep was a den of lions. Roberta had always known that the Lannisters were dangerous, but she had underestimated just how much venom lurked behind their golden smiles. Cersei despised her. That much was clear from the moment their marriage began. She had expected to be queen to a powerful man she could manipulate, not shackled to a woman who wanted nothing to do with her. At first, Cersei had tried to seduce her, whispering sweet lies, playing the dutiful wife in public. But Roberta was no fool. She knew the game. She had no use for Cersei's charms, no desire to pretend. Their bed remained cold, and Cersei's hatred festered. Then there was Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer. The moment Roberta saw the way he and Cersei looked at each other, she knew. She wasn't blind. She had fought beside men long enough to recognize desire when she saw it. But what burned between them was something darker, something forbidden. And yet Roberta didn't care. Let them have their twisted love. She had her warhammer and her drink. Let the court whisper. Let Cersei rage. It was Tywin she should have feared. The old lion was patient, cunning. He had never truly accepted a queen who fought like a man and ruled like a brute. He wanted power, and he wanted it for his family. Roberta knew he was watching, waiting for her to fall. She could feel the walls closing in. Even her counsel was turning against her. Varys spoke in riddles. Littlefinger smiled too much. Stannis grew colder with each passing day, his loyalty eroding as he watched his sister drown herself in wine and fury. And then, the worst blow of all. Joffrey. When Cersei gave birth to a son, the court rejoiced. The future of the Baratheon dynasty was secure, or so they thought. But Roberta looked at the boy with his golden curls and sharp green eyes and knew. He was no Baratheon. The child was Jaime's, the bastard son of incest. She should have raged. She should have killed them all. She should have burned Cersei and her false son and cast the Lannisters out of the keep. But she did nothing. She was tired, too tired. She let it fester, let the lie grow, let the rot spread through her own kingdom. She drowned herself in wine instead of justice. She lost herself in drink, in meaningless brawls, in the hollow thrill of battle that no longer brought her joy. The storm that had won a kingdom was slowly fading, and the lions were waiting to tear her apart. The years blurred together. Each day was the same, a haze of drink, war stories, and hollow victories. Roberta had always been a warrior first, but there was no war left to fight. And without war, what was she? The kingdom had begun slipping from her grasp. The small folk still cheered her name, remembering the warrior queen who had crushed Rhaegar Targaryen and broken the dragon's reign. But lords and schemers whispered in dark corridors, speaking of a queen unfit to rule. She knew what they called her. The drunken queen, the she-king, a woman playing at war while her realm rots. And they weren't wrong. Roberta spent more time in taverns than in council meetings. She avoided the politics of the realm, leaving the day-to-day rule to her advisors. She hunted instead of governing. She drank instead of planning. She fought meaningless fights in the yard just to feel alive. Meanwhile, the Lannisters grew stronger. Cersei ruled in all but name, pulling strings behind the scenes. Joffrey, her bastard son, was being groomed for the throne, a cruel little prince with a twisted sense of power. Tywin, ever the calculating lion, secured the loyalty of the great houses, knowing Roberta would soon be too broken, too lost to stop him. Even Stannis had turned away. Her brother had always been cold, but now his patience had run dry. He despised her weakness, her recklessness. He should have been her most loyal sword, but instead he had begun to question her rule. He still followed the laws of the realm, but his respect for her, that had died long ago. And then came the final betrayal. Jon Arryn, the man who had raised her, who had stood beside her in rebellion, was dead. Poison. Murder. The whispers in the Red Keep told her what she already feared. The Lannisters killed him. Her hands shook as she gripped her goblet, knuckles white. Jon Arryn had been one of the last people who still believed in her. One of the last men who had seen her as more than just a warrior lost in her own ruin. And now he was gone. She could feel it now, the end creeping toward her, slow and patient. The game was moving faster than she could keep up. She had fought for this throne, bled for it, lost everything for it. And now it would be stolen from her. The storm was fading, and the lions were ready to strike. The day of reckoning came faster than Roberta had expected. Jon Arryn's death had sent the realm spiraling into chaos, but she had done nothing. She had watched from her throne as power slipped through her fingers, drowning herself in drink and distraction, and now the wolves and lions had come to feast. Eddard Stark, her oldest friend, arrived in King's Landing like a specter from the past. He was still the same Ned, honorable to a fault, as rigid as the North itself. He had come at her request to be Hand of the Queen, to help her hold together the kingdom she was too broken to rule. But he had come too late. The moment he arrived, he began to dig, to look too closely at Joffrey, at the golden-haired prince who bore no trace of Baratheon blood. And then the truth was spoken. Joffrey is not your son. He is the product of incest, Jaime and Cersei's bastard. Roberta had always known. For years, she had swallowed that truth with every cup of wine, buried it beneath battle scars and empty victories. But now with Ned standing before her, demanding she take action, she realized something horrifying. She no longer cared. She had won the throne. And for what? Lyanna was dead. Her brothers had turned away. The realm despised her. What did it matter if Joffrey sat the throne after her? Let the boy have it. Let the kingdom rot. But Ned had never been able to let go of honor. He had gone to Cersei. He had told her what he knew. And the next morning, Roberta awoke to find herself trapped. Poison. Her body felt heavy, sluggish, her vision blurring at the edges. The wine had tasted strange last night, but she had thought nothing of it. She had always been able to drink more than most men and still stand. But this was different. She barely made it to her feet before the door to her chambers burst open. Ser Barristan, Maester Pycelle, and Cersei. The Queen Regent stood at the foot of her bed, draped in Lannister crimson, her green eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You should have ruled better, my queen," she said smoothly. Roberta tried to speak, but her throat burned, her words slurring. She reached for her warhammer, but her limbs refused to obey. She had fought dragons, crushed princes, shattered armies, but she had not been killed in battle. She had been undone by poison and whispers, by the very game she had refused to play. Her body collapsed onto the cold stone floor, and as darkness swallowed her, the last thing she heard was the sound of Cersei laughing. The realm mourned the fallen queen, but not for long. The banners of House Baratheon remained, but the kingdom belonged to the Lannisters now. Joffrey was crowned, his golden curls shining in the sunlight. The people cheered, unaware that the storm that had once ruled Westeros had been quietly snuffed out. The last great warrior queen was gone, and the Game of Thrones continued.